All right. Joining me is the man, I'd say one of the guys behind Elections Daily, coming on my show once again to talk about the quagmire. Is that the right word for it?
If
That
that's what you want to call it.
yeah, that was the Pennsylvania Republican primary, and a couple others on the same night. Joe Szymanski. Joe, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back on, Jonathan.
All right. So I'd say I'm actually gonna do something a little bit different. Let's start with Actually, you know what? Let's talk about the bad stuff first, then let's get to the good stuff. Let's start with Pennsylvania. Um, so last I checked, Senate primary on the Republican side has not been called. But the governor, it's Josh Shapiro versus the devil. I mean Doug Mastriano. You want to just talk about like sort of what happened and sort of in these races?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, three of the big statewide races on Tuesday night ended up being exactly what we thought they were going to be. Josh Pyra, of course, was unopposed for the Democratic nomination for governor in Pennsylvania. He's the current attorney general. Since his victory in 2016, he's been seen as someone basically as the figurehead to replace Tom Wolf once his terms were up, especially after Wolf won in 2018. It was expected that Shapiro would be the one to run again in 2022 and replace him. And his path was only made clearer, actually, by now former Treasurer Joe Torsala losing in an upset in his reelection bid in 2020, while Shapiro won relatively comfortably in his bid for reelection to Attorney General. So, in terms of that regards, that was unsurprising. Of course, he was unopposed. The Democratic primary for the Senate seat also unsurprising in the end. John Fetterman in about the last 3 months can just when we all kind of expected his lead to potentially contract and become a really close race with Connor Lamb, that just did not happen. Fetterman just in the end really dominated. Felt like Lamb just kind of gave up. We didn't really see a whole lot from him in the last couple of months there. So really, that wasn't a surprise. And of course, then Doug Mastriano winning in the Republican primary for governor against something that a lot of Republicans are very concerned about. There's been talks of certain big name donors, mainly from the Philly Collar area, that will probably back Shapiro instead of giving money to Mastriano. This was expected after Trump basically endorsed Mastriano because of his concern of the Oz endorsement succeeding. He basically saw that Mastriano kind of had a bit of a momentum swing. He led by about 8 and 9 points in recent polls, and just in the end endorsed him. There was trying to be a contracting. It would be very interesting to see maybe what would happen in this race if Trump did not decide to endorse and potentially there was a continued contraction there of the race. It could have been potentially very interesting, I think, to see where that could have led things potentially. But in the end, there were some rumors that if Trump had not endorsed, that Bill McSwain may have potentially ended his gubernatorial campaign before it was over, mainly because he lost a big backer in one of the big Pennsylvania, school choice firms. Ended up deciding, hey, you only can go vote for Barletta over Mastriano. So there was some talk of that, but once the Trump endorsement was there, from what I've seen, is that McSwain and White basically were like, you know what, we're just going to stick this through anyway because we don't think there's a shot of beating Mastriano anyway, even if we do drop out. So in the end, that was kind of really the key thing there is that, I think once it was looking like a Mastriano victory, starting to look like it, and then the Trump endorsement really, I think, just kind of solidified that in the end there, kind of brought those other 8-9% independents over, making it, he's around 43.89% right now because it's been mostly absentees. Since Tuesday night, he has lost ground. He was actually placing fourth behind McSwain, Barletta, and White for those absentee ballots, actually. So that's why you've seen him he was around 44.3 on Tuesday night. He's around 44.3. He's around 43.9 right now. So not obviously very clearly not enough, but you do see a little bit of a decrease there with the absentee ballots. Because of how against those he's been, there's some concern that he won't push for that in November, where we've seen Virginia, where Republicans push for that helped him a good bit. There's some concern that Mastriano won't do that, and that could potentially hurt him.
I think there's a lot of concerns that people have about Mastriano.
There's a lot of concerns for sure. This is just one on a pyramid of many concerns. We saw the success in Virginia for Republicans when they pushed in person or absentee voting. Mastriano just doesn't do that. He's not a guy who will do that. He'll push all election day. And there are some concerns there that could potentially, especially if the this November's first Tuesday is a particularly ugly day, which it definitely has the potential to be, at least in some parts of Pennsylvania, if you're familiar with our climate. It's something that could certainly hurt Mastriano in the end there.
Yeah, and before we get on to the big uncalled statewide race, I just want to say, you guys on the Elections Daily stream, I think you really represented what a lot of us were thinking in as those results came in, especially when you were singing the closing, the nighttime theme, the nighttime military theme. That was like, yeah, no, I think I speak for many people watching that, saying, yeah, no, you guys represented how I think a lot of us were feeling there. So I commend you guys for that. Even though probably that video is going to end up being taken down when you run for office in the future, as you mentioned. So with that in mind, let's talk about the elephant in the room being the uncalled race. Last I read, Oz was up by about 1,000 votes, with mainly absentees left, with a bit of election day precincts in Allegheny.
Yep, that is correct. Also, military and overseas ballots have also yet to be counted. Those still haven't come in yet. And also provisional ballots. There's still a good amount of those as well that haven't been counted yet as well. Those still have to be counted. The fact of the matter is, though, whether or not once everything is counted, whether or not those, it doesn't matter at this point, unless there's a huge swing towards Oz at this point, which would mean that basically every single one of those ballots would have to be for Oz. It's pretty unlikely that we don't experience an automatic recount. Pennsylvania has a rule that if a statewide race is within half percentage points, an automatic recount is triggered. They're about only 0.1 percentage points between each other right now. Most people I've talked to say even if McCormick doesn't get to the overhead margin, a lot of people think that he will get the margin down below 1,000 votes right now. And that's kind of in the range where we're going to see that's the range where nonsense can happen. If you remember, I don't know if any of our viewers will remember Bush v. Gore. Obviously, I wasn't even born yet when Bush v. Gore happened, but it's known that kind of once you get down to under 1,000 votes, that's when results can actually be changed, especially in a statewide race. That's when a lot of nonsense can happen and where a lot of stuff can be changed. So we're certainly not done yet. Both campaigns are started to reach out to Pennsylvania voters, reaching out and offering money to not only be poll watchers right now, but also potentially be ready to be watchers during the recounting process. You remember the famous pictures of the Bush v. Gore recount in Florida, where you would see there would be a ballot being held up and you would see almost 10 people swarming the ballot and surrounding it. You're going to see pictures like that in Pennsylvania. Allegheny County, especially too. We can't forget that the Democratic primary for the new 12th district there, also very much an automatic recount category. Summerlee is up right now, but Steve Irwin has refused to concede yet.
I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to Pennsylvania 12. I'm going to get to that.
All right. So I'll keep it to the Senate race, though. Just to everyone, we are far, far, far from finished yet. It's very possible this could take us at least till the middle of June. It depends on first of all, we have to make sure that every ballot that we get is tallied. And then once that happens, because it's an automatic recount, then the Secretary of State then has to announce when the recount begins. And then not only then can the recount happen. We don't really know what that date is yet. Remember, it's already going to be May 20th tomorrow. We don't know if the Allegheny election day results will be fully tabulated potentially until either Monday or Tuesday of next week. I mean, potentially we could have all the election day votes not in until the 24th of May, and then you still have to count provisional and military ballots. That could theoretically take us closer to Memorial Day and the end of the month. So that would mean a recount may not start until the beginning of June. And that would potentially mean the recount wouldn't end until potentially around, June, somewhere between June 10th and June 14th, potentially. So this is going to be a long process. Pennsylvania this is the automatic recount rule was new in 2005, was part of a bill passed in 2005 that said any statewide race that's 0.5% or less triggers an automatic recount. No one has to ask for it. And that's whether it was a primary or general election. It hasn't actually had to be used yet in a statewide race. So this is the first time we're going to get to see that. We haven't had a primary or a general election race this close in Pennsylvania since that rule. I believe there's been elections that close previously to the rule, but I believe this is the first time we're going to have it since the rule has gone. Even in primaries, we've had 1% to 2% decisions, but we've never had, as close as we've had it today. And I don't think a lot of people, maybe other than some who have been paying it, who had, paid attention to Pennsylvania races before, but I don't think outside of it, people necessarily expected it would be McCormick going up against Oz in this close race. A lot of people thought, and polling backed up, that is really the first time that right-wing polling firms have missed in a primary so far has been the Senate primary. Again, this is something I've talked about repeatedly, both on my Twitter and on Election Daily shows, is that polling in Pennsylvania has routinely underperformed strong Western Pennsylvania candidates in Pennsylvania previously. It should be said that Pennsylvania does something weird. We put our instead of putting up as incumbent or something else, we instead put county names on.
There's no incumbent on the ballot.
And there's no incumbent. There is no sign for incumbent, but we do put the county location, or for local races, the township location, township or borough, I should say, one of the two. But, this is kind of where that comes in here. McCormick was the only one from the western part of the state. His home base is in Allegheny County. He also did really well where around he grew up. He grew up in Bloomsburg, which is more towards the central part of the state. That's where kind of more of a surprise was. If you look at the map of the race, you'd be able to see that McCormick did really kind of well in the upper half of what we'd call the T here, and kind of in like the middle part of that T. You can see McCormick do surprisingly well. That's because he's actually was born in that area. He's from Bloomsburg. It's part of those counties in that area there. He actually did relatively well there. A lot of people have actually blamed it on Kathy Barnett, kind of splitting off the Oz vote there. In the end, kind of splitting off the MAGA vote in the end. And that's kind of why we're in the situation. I think if this was a 1v1 race, or if Barnett hadn't experienced that momentum, Oz with the Trump endorsement probably would have, maybe not, 70-30 or anything, but I'd say probably a good 60-40 or 55-45 would have been the Senate nominee, and we wouldn't be dealing with this right now. But instead, because of the field, because of Kathy Barnett having that quick rise and taking away certainly parts of the base that Oz was hoping for, this is why we're in this situation right now, and why we're going. This is, like I said, this is going to be a long process from what I've been told here in Pennsylvania.
So I do have like a few questions just in terms of follow-up. You've raised the specter and the excitement of the recount law being invoked for the first time. I would like to point out that I do remember reading somewhere that theoretically, once the point for the recount comes, McCormick could just say, hey, you know what? I don't want to recount. Oz wins. He can.
He can do that. He's not going to do it. He's already started hiring lawyers for the recount event. His campaign team has already started reaching out to people to look for people who could be involved. They're offering, from a text I got, around $200 a day to be part of that work. So that will not happen. Right. Unless something massive changes. That's not something that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I guess watching the election results come in, it didn't escape my attention that when North Carolina reported the early vote within minutes, all counties reported at the same time. Pennsylvania was county by county, like Allegheny came in first, then a bunch of others came in. It gets the sense that, at least, based on this race, that, Pennsylvania seems to be marginally better than New York at counting ballots, it seems like.
Yeah, the problem that we've had in Pennsylvania is, especially with the continued focus on early and absentee votes, as well as those have become a bigger part of the election night system, Pennsylvania does not require pre-canvassing of those ballots. And that causes a problem. Like, again, and this was something we were complaining about on the stream that night. If you watched us, or if your viewers are watching us, I know you were watching us. You remember that the big issue was that Pennsylvania, we had no idea whether they were early votes, whether they were election day votes, whether we were going to get all the early vote first and then the election day votes, whether we were going to get a mixture. We had no idea. In North Carolina, they have pre-canvassing requirements, which means every county by the time they get absentee or mail-in votes, they have to have them all done by a certain time on election night, and then they dump them all. I believe they all came in around sometime between 7:50 and 8 o'clock, if my memory serves me correctly.
I remember it actually within 5 minutes of the polls closing.
Yeah, it was relatively early in the night. Yeah, you're right. Excuse me. You are right. It was within 5 to 10 minutes of the polls closing. We got these very quickly because by the time around, I believe, 7 o'clock, 30 minutes before polls close, counties have to have those absentee ballots or mail-in ballots counted and ready for reporting. We saw that in North Carolina, there was about 370,000 absentee votes. We got them all, and we got them all at the same time, and boom, we were off. And then that way we knew that basically almost every ballot that we saw for the rest of the night would be election day vote. And that allowed us to tell for, House races or Senate, allowed us to call for Ted Budd. Immediately, we could tell that Pat McCrory wasn't going to come back from that.
And Ted Budd's leading in the early vote, then he's got it.
Yeah. And then you look at, the primary in Madison Cawthorn's district. He was down pretty heavily with about 7 points. He knocked it down to 2, of course, but we basically said, but that allows us to say, though, here's what Madison Cawthorn has to do if he wants to overtake Chuck Edwards. Obviously, because of election day returns and mainly around Edwards' Senate district, which is Buncombe, Henderson, and Transylvania, which is basically the lower half of Buncombe, Henderson County, and Transylvania County to the west there. Because of how election day returns basically were not at all that different to the mail-in or absentee turn-ins, that's when we kind of like, Cawthorn is probably not going to be able to do this, and that ended up being true as he lost his primary by 2 points. That's where the benefit comes in of that. This is a frustration I've had not only in 2020, but in 2021 and now 2022 with Pennsylvania. We had these issues with our judicial primary and general election, judicial primary back in May of last year, as well as with the, if you remember, the ballot questions from last year as well. Again, there were issues where we just did not know whether vote was election day or early voting. And, that was a big problem. And it's kind of really the first big primary that we've seen that issue happen. There is obviously like I've said before, there's obviously no fraud. That's not happening here. That's not the reason. The issue is that we have really poor vote counting rules here in Pennsylvania, and they do need to be changed. And also a relatively weak Secretary of State office, which I think is another key part of the issue that I think is generally undiscussed when we talk about Pennsylvania counting problems.
1 second, I'm going to pause. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned the Pennsylvania race. Pennsylvania. Well, there was a bunch of Pennsylvania races. Pennsylvania 12 is what I meant to say, which was the showdown between Steve Irwin and Summer Lee. I mean, it kind of ties back into the whole question about absentees. I could tell, at least I was texting my friend Bethany Hallam that night. She could tell that the first vote that dropped in, like the first 59% that dropped in for Steve Irwin, that was mail-in and early voted. So is it, this is sort of like two questions into one. Like, can we talk about Pennsylvania 12 as well as a couple others? And also, is it, I think it really depends on the county, because Allegheny County, I think, is better at reporting absentees quicker than I think other counties in Pennsylvania. But yes, let's talk about Pennsylvania 12.
But yeah, I think I'll start with the counting issue, because I think I will go through that quickly, which it's a very short answer, which is yes. Again, this kind of boils down to a very weak Secretary of State position. It's not a elected a position with its own office like many of them are in American states. It is actually in a position appointed by the governor. It's something that I've had an issue with Pennsylvania since I've really kind of started looking into it. I've always kind of had an issue that we do not have an elected Secretary of State with its own big office like we do with the Attorney General and the Treasurer and the Auditor General of all things. That's something that I'm concerned about. It's, again, been proven to be an issue time and time again. But going to PA 12, this was a race that was a big highlight of the night. It was a usual progressive versus establishment race. Long-time incumbent Congressman Mike Doyle, he'd been there since 1994, I believe. He retired this year. He decided to retire instead of running again for re-election. It was a decently different district because of the redistricting process and the loss of a district than it was. It was still the full city of Pittsburgh, but it had taken in some parts of Westmoreland County. It had lost some of its inner suburbs there to the 17th to continue that to make that a bit more Democratic leaning. It's still a heavily Democratic district, but I think Doyle, just because of issues relating to redistricting and potential primary challengers, and just I think it looks like because it kind of still does look like Democrats are not going to be in the majority for at least the next after post 2022 cycle and session. I think, he'd been there enough. He was done. That opened up this race between Summerlee and Steve Irwin. Irwin was the guy endorsed by Doyle. He was endorsed by APAC. He was endorsed by a couple of unions. The unions are really split in this race. Some of them endorsed Summerlee. Others endorsed Steve Irwin. Lee, of course, big progressive backing of John Fetterman, backing of the squad, Bernie Sanders. It was a pretty typical type of race but we haven't really seen one be this tight yet. If Lee does hold on, she'll be one of two progressive victories over the night. The second
being
one
in Oregon.
The second one being in Oregon. Jamie McLeod Skinner beating Blue Dog Democrat Kurt Schrader.
Has that been called yet? Last I saw, it wasn't called.
I believe most analysts have said that they believe McLeod Skinner will pull ahead. I will pull this out no matter what the Clackamas County vote is. The margins in other counties are just too big.
Mm-hmm.
But really, I think kind of the other key issue here, though, is that, again, this one is even tighter. This one, I believe, is still less than even a percentage point in terms of being decided, I believe. This is just another marginally close race.
Is Lee up 600 votes or less than 100 now?
I don't remember what it is here. I can take a quick look, but okay. It is scary close right now between those two.
Yeah, I'll let you share if you have anything you want to share.
Yeah, it's Lee's up about 4,000 votes right now in the in the Allegheny portion of the district. The thing with the Pennsylvania Secretary of State map is that we can't just go by we have to go by county. Mm-hmm. And then Irwin himself is he's up about 3,700 in the Westmoreland part. So it's about a 300 vote difference between the two right now.
Although some analysts I've seen have called it for Lee, though.
Again, because we don't know where those Allegheny County election day precincts are, I believe some of them are located in that district. They'll probably go for Lee. If they go for Lee by a pretty substantial amount, it's probably fair to say that this is over. But if they are maybe a bit more even than maybe we've expected, this is another race I could see going to a recount potentially.
All right. And this was a race that was not on a lot of people's minds, but in Pennsylvania's 7th, Susan Wild, who was expected to face Republican Lisa Scheller, she's going to face Lisa Scheller, but the margin was closer than I think a lot of people were expecting. I'm just curious about what happened there.
From what I heard from some of my sources in the Lehigh Valley, where that district is located, is that Deliker was not like some far right candidate who tapped into debates or anything. He actually ran a relatively big tent campaign. Scheller had some issues in the primary the year previously, again, where she won by a similarly narrow margin in that primary against Dean Browning back in 2020. Again, someone who just kind of connected with a lot of voters. There were complaints about Scheller not really campaigning all that much in Lehigh County. Don't forget that Carbon County is now added into that district. That's a whole new area where both candidates had to look at. Apparently, Deliker did decently well there as well. I'm not really all that concerned. Deliker, again, was not a guy who was out there and super crazy, but Scheller is the better candidate. She's someone who's introduced herself to most of those voters before. And under these new lines, she actually would probably have been a congresswoman at this point compared to Susan Wild, just because of the usual down ballot of performance that we saw by Republicans in 2020. This was a seat that Biden only won by not even a percentage point. Those are usually the type of seats where we saw Republicans flip or win in 2020. So this is a race that's going to be very tough for Susan Wild. Scheller, again, the type of female candidate that we've seen Republicans push for and definitely do better with in these type of House races since from 2020 on. So, I think this might be a race that, even in my opinion, might even be slightly more likely that Republicans take in 2022, maybe even than the neighboring 8th district, even though that's a Trump district, just because of the background of Mark Cartwright and how that will still be a tough issue to deal with as well.
Right. And, I'm just curious, if there's anything else that happened in Pennsylvania that's noteworthy, or I guess, maybe not been expected, or if we should talk about, let's just end off, I guess, this by talking about something that happened that was a little bit more satisfying for, I think, conservatives like us. And that was what happened to Madison Cawthorn. And because it was, I think what we saw was he basically made a comment that pissed off the wrong people, and he got hit with an avalanche of revelations that ultimately cost him his seat.
Yeah, in the end, I think it was just like I was texting a friend today. It was just another thing after another thing after another thing. There was a point there at the beginning of the month, end of April, beginning of May, where it just felt like every day there was a new Madison Cawthorn thing coming out. If you remember, it was just like another thing after another thing after another thing. First, it was, hey, he's been caught inside an airport twice with a loaded gun. You know, that's somewhere it's like first time mistake, second time, what the heck are you doing, buddy? You know, a multiple count of speeding and driving, being caught twice driving with suspended license. That's concerning. And then you get into the more concerning stuff. You look at potential insider trading issues that were within actually cryptocurrency. There were internal issues inside the district too. He had closed every local every district office inside the 11th district except for one, which was on the way end of the district there. He had tried to carpetbag over the Charlotte area district because he thought the originally within the gerrymander map, the originally drawn 11 was going to be too hard for him to potentially hold in a presidential year. So he was trying to move over to a safe seat closer to the Charlotte area. Then he tried to move back after the court map was stepped in and people didn't like that. And then also a political article really kind of showed how he had lost support from a lot of local area candidates who had supported him in 2020. And, you know, I think that was almost a bigger show of, you know, okay, this explains why this guy is losing after doing relatively well compared to the expected vanity in 2020, why he's losing now. You know, there was just a whole slew of reasons. I think it was just the scandals or just the inside district issues. I don't think that would be enough, but I think because you combine the two, that's where we kind of see this guy fall. That's where you see Cawthorn fall. Chuck Edwards, he'll probably close to about a 10 to 15 point win in that seat, maybe even more if the red wave is that big in North Carolina come the fall. And it does kind of take out a bogeyman for Democrats in that seat. This is already about a Trump +9 seat. On the fringes, if Cawthorn was continuing to be in that seat without Cawthorn there, you know, it's kind of hard for me to see Democrats really competing in this seat if it stays the way it is for this decade.
Right. And I realize we probably are running out of time here. So just want to, you know, remind everyone here, you guys are going to be back on Tuesday night.
We'll be back on Tuesday night. It is Alabama, Georgia, and the Texas runoffs are the big ones that night, as well as the Arkansas primaries. We're not expecting too much in Arkansas, but Alabama and Georgia, as you guys know, have some big races. And I believe the Texas runoffs are that night as well. So, you know, that'll be a big night as well. Making sure I check here. Yes, it is May 24th. So that is next Tuesday. So that'll be a big night itself as well. So with Alabama and Georgia, as well as the Texas runoffs for some key races there. That'll be a big night. So we'll be back on Tuesday night. Hopefully, I believe we'll have a full crowd this time. Kraz Grynett should be back for that one. So we'll have a full 4-person boardroom again here. As we have the final primaries of May 31st. We don't have any primaries. Then we're back in on June for almost every week, I think, during the week of June. And then as well, there are some big New York now, big key primary that was pushed back to late August, but that's still a big one to watch there as well.
And I encourage everyone to tune in and watch these guys. These guys do amazing work on Tuesday night. Joe Szymanski, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.